She believed that she was destroying her stepdaughter's life by forcing her to marry a man from the street. But Laura didn't know that this decision would change everything, not just for Clara, but for everyone around her. A story of betrayal, revenge, and a dark secret that will soon come to light. Are you ready to find out what happens when the past makes itself felt? Before you continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like if you also love stories full of twists and emotions. Now get ready for what's to come. Rain clouds hung low over the old mansion, with twisted iron gates reflecting the gloomy atmosphere of the place. A howling wind blew through cracks in the facade, where stone gargoyles seemed to watch passers-by in silence. Inside the house, Clara, a young woman with a pleasant but tired appearance, watched the coming storm through the window in the main hallway. Her heart was heavy because the last conversation with her stepmother Laura made her realize that something terrible was going to happen. The girl did not expect that in a few hours her life would be turned upside down by a dishonest decision that would force her to seal her uncertain fate at the side of a stranger. Clara was a delicate figure. She wore a simple dress in light colors, and her dark hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders. With every gust of wind that made the glass tremble, her heart fluttered too. Her sense of danger was no coincidence. Laura had been hinting over the past few weeks that the pleasure she had been giving her stepdaughter was coming to an end. It was no secret that her stepmother despised all forms of compassion or altruism, qualities that Clara carried within herself as an intrinsic part of her identity. Clara was about 8 years old when Laura came into her family's life. During this period, after losing her mother, she and her father, Henrique, lived a sad but united life. He, an entrepreneur and owner of several properties, was enchanted by Laura's mysterious beauty and self-confidence. Within a few months, the woman had already taken the place of his wife and later transformed the house into a scene of manipulation. Even though she never showed affection, Laura masked her coldness with expensive gifts and the occasional affectionate comment. It was the perfect varnish for deceiving inattentive eyes. The woman knew how to seduce, persuade, and subjugate. Over time, Clara realized that Laura's influence was growing, and she had more and more control over Henry's finances. At the same time, the stepmother showed an almost undisguised contempt for Clara's gentle manners and compassion. If the girl showed any desire to help the court staff or people in need, Laura was quick to reprimand her, saying that kindness was weakness. For her, the world was divided into those who dominated and those who were dominated. Soon after, Henry fell ill. It was sudden. Clara was 14 when he began to feel constant fatigue and a cough that he couldn't get rid of. Within a few months, my father began to lose strength and died in a private hospital under strange circumstances that were never thoroughly investigated. Clara saw that Laura had completely taken over the house and the business, taking sole responsibility for any decisions. The young woman then became dependent on the person who became her legal guardian. The following years were lonely for Clara as she began to give in to Laura's desires. Although she attended parties and social gatherings at her stepmother's request, the young woman had few friends and virtually no opportunities to live independently. It was as if she, even though she was already an adult, was still trapped in a golden cage. Laura used all her charm at dinners and parties to gain influence and cement her image as a virtuous widow who took in an orphaned stepdaughter. But behind closed doors, the atmosphere was freezing. Until one rainy afternoon, Clara fled to the city center, which she rarely did without permission. She was carrying a small package of sandwiches, fruit, and juice, thinking she was going to give it to someone in need. Earlier during my walks, I noticed a young man who was sleeping near an abandoned train station. He was young, looked 20 years old, with tousled hair and a look of suppressed sadness on his face. As Clara approached, the boy huddled against the dirty concrete wall, shivering from the cold. She pulled out a package, offering food. Her eyes met his, and she felt surprise and then quiet gratitude. He opened the package, took one of the sandwiches, and devoured it as if he hadn't eaten in days. When he finished, he managed to mumble, "Thank you." Clara smiled and said she would be back soon to check on how she felt. The simplicity of the gesture was at odds with the intensity of this meeting. Raphael was 28 years old, but he seemed to carry the burden of the misfortunes he had experienced throughout his life. He'd lived on the street long enough to lose almost everything, including the hope of returning to the place he'd once called home. His memories were blurred, like fragments of the past that were gradually falling apart. He didn't say much about the reasons for his stay there, but deep down, he felt that he had once been more than just a beggar. That night, when Clara offered him food, he felt something else, a spark of humanity. Not only has his hunger been satisfied, but also the realization that although the world has turned its back on him, there are still people who want to help him. For the first time in a long time, Raphael felt a ray of hope. "I didn't know Clara, but this gesture was meant to leave a mark." Laura, who had always followed Clara's steps closely, discovered one day that her stepdaughter had accosted someone on the street. This discovery filled her with rage. She hated any sign of generosity on Clara's part, and even more hated the fact that this young woman had any will of her own. After much deliberation, he came up with a cruel plan to destroy Clara's chastity by forcing her to marry the man she was helping. When she had planned every detail, Laura called Clara to the mansion's office. Sitting in a leather armchair, in the glow of the dim light, the stepmother said directly, "You will marry this man who lives on the streets." Clara almost fell backwards. My heart started beating faster. There was no way to accept it. However, Laura always had an ace up her sleeve. With an icy stare, she said that if Clara refused, she would use her power to block any inheritance rights that the young woman might be entitled to, as well as defame the name of Clara's late father, destroying the memory that was so dear to the young woman. This time, the blackmail seemed impossible to circumvent. "Don't be fooled, girl. I mastered everything. If you don't follow my orders, you may even lose the roof over your head," Laura added. A few days later, the luxury car pulled up near the alley where Raphael used to spend his nights. The driver, elegant and silent, announced that someone very influential wanted to talk to him. Confused, but with no other choice, Raphael followed the man to the mansion. There he was received by Laura in an impeccably decorated room. Clara's stepmother offered him food, clean clothes, and a bath. For someone who had slept on a cold floor for so long, such a sense of comfort seemed unreal. After an awkward dinner, Laura explained her proposal. "I want you to marry my stepdaughter. You will get all the best. You will have a roof over your head, food, new clothes, money, and of course, you will do exactly what I tell you." Raphael was shocked and speechless. Marry a stranger? He lived in the hell of everyday life. And yet something about this woman, Laura, gave him chills. She looked at him as if he were a disposable item. But before he could think of refusal, Laura threw another bait. "Think about it. You will finally have the chance to get off the street. To refuse would be foolish." When Clara discovered that Raphael was staying in one of the guest rooms, she panicked. She didn't understand what her stepmother was planning, but she felt that Laura was going to humiliate her by dragging her into a loveless marriage. At the same time, the young woman felt sorry for Raphael. He had apparently allowed himself to be manipulated by his stepmother's false promises. One morning, Clara mustered up her courage and spoke to him directly, knocking on the door of his luxurious room. Raphael replied to her, wearing new clothes that still didn't fit him naturally. He looked as out of place as she did. "So you're the girl who helped me then, aren't you?" he said in a gentle voice. Clara nodded, her heart still beating strongly. She could not hide her embarrassment caused by this situation. I don't want you to feel obligated to do anything," she muttered. "I know Laura must have offered you something, but I don't want anyone to sacrifice themselves for me." Rafał, looking at his shoes, replied almost in a whisper, "I was hungry, cold, desperate. I have no prospects. I know it sounds crazy, but this is the first time that someone offers me a way out of a situation." Then they both fell silent. Deep down, everyone understood that Laura was taking advantage of Rafał's desperation and Clara's weakness to achieve a sick goal. They knew that they could become pawns in a dirty game for power. As the days passed in the mansion, Rafał could not shake off flashes of the past. When he saw certain rooms, old objects or photographs covered with dust, he had the impression that part of his memory was trying to reveal itself. He couldn't put these memories into a coherent form, but there was something about the corridors and the atmosphere of the place that bothered him, as if the mansion was hiding secrets that worried him too. One afternoon, Clara saw him standing in front of a family photo hanging in the hall. It was a painting depicting Henry, Clara's deceased father, next to his first wife, Clara's mother. Rafał came so close to the frame that he could even notice the texture of the brushstrokes. His heart beat faster inexplicably, as if this image awakened something in him far beyond simple curiosity. Laura, determined to speed up her plans, organized the wedding in no time. In less than a week, decorators, florists, and a hastily hired priest transformed the mansion's gardens into luxurious surroundings. Clara was wearing a dazzling wedding outfit, but her face was filled with deep sadness. Rafał, dressed in a well-tailored suit, also looked worried. Neither of them smiled as they approached the makeshift altar. Few guests were present. Most of them were Laura's friends, rich and influential people who valued all eccentricity. Curious, they whispered about how the stepdaughter of a housewife could marry a man without past or class. Laura stood in the back, a cynical smile on her face, pleased with Clara's humiliation. As the priest began the ceremony, the silence that fell in the garden seemed overwhelming. Clara's expression was one of utter resignation. Rafał, on the other hand, felt a wave of emotion rising in him, as if something inside him was rebelling against this situation. The moment the priest asked them to take their marriage vows, Rafał stood still. He swallowed, looked at Clara, and saw a mixture of despair and kindness in her eyes. The burden of participating in this farce was unbearable. And then he made an unexpected decision. "I can't continue," he said loudly, interrupting the ritual. Laura's eyes widened and her face showed signs of anger. The guests began to whisper, shocked. Clara was stunned. The priest took a step back, confused. "Do you like it?" Laura asked in a threatening tone. Rafał, looking at everyone, continued, "I am not who you think I am. My name is not Rafał. My real name is Gabriel Martins. And I have very strong reasons to believe that I am not here by accident." Panic swept over Laura's face. She looked at the groom as if she saw a ghost. The audience began to move, intrigued by this statement. Clara, holding the bouquet, felt a shiver run down her spine. "Gabriel Martins," repeated the voice of one of the guests. "Martins, are you related to Roberto Martins?" That question made Laura grit her teeth. At that moment, Gabriel's, formerly Rafał's, expression hardened. "Yes, Roberto Martins was my father, murdered under mysterious circumstances, and I believe that Laura, Clara's stepmother, was behind all this." The murmur among those present turned into a frantic noise. Laura, completely crazy, tried to interrupt Gabriel, but he approached his stepmother and accused her with his finger. "You took my father from me, manipulated him, stole his property and made it look like a tragic accident. Then he disappeared to start a new life, but I survived even after I was thrown out on the street like a nuisance." Clara felt her heart start beating faster. He looked at Laura, looking for some explanation. Stepmother's eyes, shining with hatred, made it clear that all this was true. The perfect mask she had always worn began to crumble irreversibly. Amid Laura's screams and protests as she hysterically tried to defend herself, Gabriel said that for years he didn't know why his life had been turned upside down. He spent flashes of his childhood in a large house where a beautiful but cold woman lived, whose father was Roberto Martins. Until one day, everything fell apart. "My father was found dead after an alleged robbery," Gabriel said, his voice cracking. "I have never found conclusive proof of this, but I have always suspected that it was all planned by the woman he married." Hearing this, Laura burst out, "Lies! You're just an opportunistic beggar." However, one of the guests approached him and said that he had met Robert many years ago and that Gabriel's appearance was very similar to the deceased man. This resemblance dispelled all attempts by Laura to say that it was all a fabrication. Clara was shocked and felt betrayed in every way. Now she understood that Laura had never been just a strict stepmother. She was a real criminal, probably involved in the death of her father, Enrique. All the pain she had experienced since his death could have been part of Laura's even bigger plan. Laura, unable to hold a pose, took a few steps back, shaking with anger. I was cornered. A chorus of voices began to demand explanations from her. Then she completely lost control. "You don't know anything about what I've been through." I had to fight to get what I deserved. She screamed, panicked. "I was always surrounded by weak men who underestimated my value. If I had to eliminate obstacles, I would. And I would do it again if I had to." A shocking confession hung in the air. Terrified, guests began to leave the premises, fearing that they were involved in a scandal. Clara saw Laura's frantic gaze, and she couldn't help but look at her stepdaughter. "You ungrateful girl, you have always opposed me. Did you really think it would have a happy ending?" Gabriel reacted by standing between them. "Don't touch her. You've already destroyed enough lives." Laura, furious, ran into the house, followed by security guards. The sound of breaking glass resounded in the corridors. Stunned, Clara and Gabriel followed her, afraid of what their stepmother might do. When they found her in the living room, Laura searched the drawers for something until she pulled out a small silver-barreled revolver and pointed it at Gabriel. The rain, which had previously announced the arrival of winter, began to fall heavily on the roof. Thunder rang out and lightning lit up the stage. Laura, holding the pistol in her hand, was shaking. It was not known whether from anger or fear. "You have destroyed everything," she shouted to Gabriel. "For years, I tried to erase all trace of you, but Clara, with her accursed obsession with kindness, forced me to bring you here, and now my entire empire will be in ruins." Clara begged. "Laura, stop. You don't have to do that. I've already lost." But the stepmother was determined. "Have I lost? No, I can still get out of here and not be arrested if I lock you all up once and for all." Laura tightened her finger on the trigger, but Gabriel instinctively grabbed a chair nearby and threw it at her. The sound of the shot echoed from the ceiling. The sparks that were created after the shot danced in the air. Amid the deafening noise, security guards and some employees tried to stop her. Then Laura realized that she was surrounded. In a panic, she knocked over the vase, ran to the side door, and disappeared under the storm raging in the garden. Laura headed towards the mansion's garage, where the luxury car was parked. Without hesitation, he started the engine and drove towards the main gate, which opened with the force of the vehicle. Clara and Gabriel arrived in time to see him drive away, almost losing control of the car in the wet corners. A little further away, one of the family's employees, loyal to Clara, had already called the police. For a few minutes, Laura's car zigzagged along the dark road surrounding the property. Wind and rain made visibility almost zero. At every turn, it seemed that the vehicle was about to overturn. In a fit of madness, Laura sped up even more, as if she would rather risk her own life than face the consequences of her crimes. Soon, a police car arrived, and sirens sounded in the rearview mirror. It was too late for Laura. In a dangerous place, the road bordered on a steep precipice. When she tried to avoid a falling branch, she lost control. Within seconds, the car skidded, hit the railing and rolled down the ravine. The sound of the collision was shocking. The mask was destroyed, and the explosion that followed lit up the grey sky with a gruesome flash. At the mansion, Clara and Gabriel waited for news, along with the policeman who had already arrived. It was inevitable that they would ask about Laura, but the questions were cut short as soon as one of the agents answered the call via the communicator. Fatal accident. The car went off the road. It exploded as it hit rocks on the slope. No one survived. Clara hugged Gabriel, tears streaming down her face. It was a feeling of relief, interspersed with shock. Although Laura was a cruel stepmother, and although she committed terrible crimes, her sudden and violent death was tragic. The end of the man who, acting in accordance with greed, lost everything, including his own life. The police gathered a statement, searched the house, and made sure that the residents would remain in the custody of Clara, the rightful heir, until the court decided on further steps. Gabriel, still confused by so many revelations, helped as much as he could, but he felt that he was torn by emotions. He was now free to reconstruct his story, but at the same time, he was shaken by the intensity of the last few hours. In the days that followed, Clara provided the authorities with all sorts of documents that could help investigate Laura's crimes. Suspicious bank accounts, old transactions of Clara's father, documents of Gabriel's late father. With each discovery, the web of manipulation Laura had built over the years became more and more apparent. Rigged marriages, suspicious deaths, and financial fraud. To Clara's surprise, some of Henrique's inheritance was still available in the accounts that her stepmother had used cautiously, trying not to spend the money lavishly. If Laura hadn't appeared on the scene, the rightful possession would have returned to Clara. As for Gabriel, it didn't take long for concrete evidence to confirm his relationship with Roberto Martins. He presented old documents that he had managed to preserve over the years, and that he protected like a treasure even when he wandered the streets. The DNA test proved to be the final blow that dispelled all doubts. Gabriel Martins was in fact Robert's son. In this way, part of his former property, which illegally passed into Laura's hands, will also be returned to him. The manor house has undergone a thorough renovation. Clara, who always found it gloomy, decided to open the windows, replace the heavy furniture with lighter ones, and remove the images that brought back painful memories. She felt that she had to erase all traces of Laura's presence. Gabriel, on the other hand, not only actively participated in the renovation of the rooms, but also became Clara's greatest confidant. United by a calamity that almost separated them forever, they created a deep bond of mutual respect. A forced marriage that never took place gave way to sincere friendship. Gabriel told Clara about the nightmare of living on the streets, the humiliation he had experienced when he asked for money, and how he had almost lost the will to live. In response, Clara talked about her childhood without her mother, about the dark times after Henrique's death, about Laura's manipulations, and about how she always felt overwhelmed by the presence of evil in the house. During these confessions, they realized that despite their different roots and painful past, they had something in common, the courage to survive in a hostile world. And gradually this fragile friendship turned into a stronger feeling. After regaining the inheritance, Clara and Gabriel decided that they couldn't just enjoy the money, while so many people on the street were struggling with the same difficulties he faced. Out of compassion, they founded a non-profit organization to provide shelter, food, and work opportunities to homeless people. They named it Casa Aurora, symbolizing the sunrise that is reborn every day, illuminating new beginnings. Clara and Gabriel's first activity was to purchase and renovate a building in the center where they could receive homeless people, provide them with medical and psychological support, and conduct training workshops. They felt that they had to repay life for the second chance they were given. The story of Gabriel, who left behind the bitterness of the street, became an example for those who came with no prospects. One afternoon, as Clara and Gabriel were walking through the rooms of the new shelter, an elderly man with tired eyes approached them. At first, I was ashamed to admit that I had nowhere to sleep. Gabriel put his hand on her shoulder and said, "I know what it's like. I lived like this for years. Here you will not be judged, but only welcomed." The man, completely moved, burst into tears. It was at that moment that Clara realized what a great good they were doing. She and Gabriel sowed hope in hearts that the world often ignored. That same night, Gabriel and Clara were talking in the shelter's canteen, where the first residents had already begun to be admitted. Clara sighed and looked around. It feels like a dream to know that we are able to provide a safe place for those who need it most after all. Have you ever imagined you'd get this far? Gabriel gently took her hand. When I saw myself at the altar, ready to seal a pact I didn't want, I never imagined that a few weeks later I would be free from the ghosts of the past. And on top of that, I would be standing next to someone as extraordinary as you. Clara blushed and lowered her eyes. You say that because you finally got to know me better? He smiled out of the corner of his mouth. I say this because your gesture of compassion, that sandwich, that look of respect and not pity, was the impulse that made all of this possible. A real bond blossomed between Clara and Gabriel. However, they were both hesitant to take this step, either out of fear or fear of taking hasty action after so many tragedies. But when they worked side by side, their collaboration was undeniable. Long conversations in the evenings, an exchange of smiles at the end of an exhausting day at the shelter, the feeling of relief they felt when they saw that the other person was okay. One night, after all the residents of the shelter had gone to bed, Clara and Gabriel were looking through the paperwork and lists of things they needed at the front desk. She was sitting typing something on the computer while he watched her. Gabriel, without realizing it, looked at her tenderly. Then he was seized by an irrepressible need to be honest. Clara, I have to tell you something. Intrigued, she looked up. Tell me. He hesitated for a moment, but the silence in the empty cafe comforted him. I know this may sound crazy. We live in a traumatic situation, but I love you. Her eyes widened and her heart began to pound. She had feelings for him, but she always held them back, thinking that it could all be the result of someone lost who had been through the storm of events. Clara smiled with a flush on her face, and tears of emotion began to flow. You have no idea how happy this makes me. I love you too, Gabriel. They hugged each other and for the first time freed themselves from a past full of lies and pain, seeing the prospect of a bright future. When the relationship was confirmed, Clara and Gabriel began to talk about officially strengthening the relationship, but not in the forced way that almost brought them together in an unhappy marriage. Well, that would be my honest decision, made out of love. The idea of getting married, which was witnessed by people supporting their fight, was born naturally. Over time, Casa Aurora became a reference project in the city, which hosted many families in difficulty. Clara and Gabriel were closer than ever, dedicating their lives to offering people something they both valued, a new opportunity. In the process, Clara received word that she was expecting a baby. The discovery came about in a discreet but deeply moving way. In the Manor's kitchen, which has been converted into a much friendlier home, Gabriel joked about the situation, saying that a child is already starting life with two missions: to be happy and to help others. For Clara, pregnancy was a symbol of the final light, ending the darkest period of her life. On the eve of their second wedding, now legitimate, Clara and Gabriel decided to exchange rings in the same garden where the disastrous, almost wedding ceremony had once taken place. However, instead of haughty and gossiping guests, the place was filled with children, the elderly and people who found family in Casa Aurora. The atmosphere of harmony and simplicity was striking. During the ceremony, Clara wore a simple, inconspicuous white dress. Gabriel was wearing a light blue suit. Next to them stood a priest who agreed to perform the ceremony without any pomp. When they finally took their marriage vows, the sun set below the horizon, coloring the sky a bright orange. The flower petals thrown by the guests formed a colorful arc that contrasted with the memory of the rainy day when they almost met in the middle of a lie. Amid emotional applause, Clara and Gabriel kissed, sealing the love that emerged from the unimaginable chaos. Where once there was deceit and pain, there has now been a renewal. The following months brought changes and joy. Clara and Gabriel's baby was born healthy and was named Aurora in honor of the project and the dawn that symbolized new life for everyone. Casa Aurora has grown, opening new branches in other areas of the city. It has become a social movement with a significant reach, capable of influencing public policy in order to benefit those most in need. A police investigation found that Laura had more and more enemies over the decades and suspected many people of committing crimes. His personal file, found at the residence, revealed international money laundering plans and a list of names of people who collaborated in his frauds. Some of them, influencers, were also accused, proving that the stepmother's influence reached much further than Clara suspected. Laura's tragic accident, as a result of which she died, finally freed many people from the shadow of her manipulation. Although the mansion became a place full of light and good memories, a silent trace remained in the portraits that Clara and Gabriel decided to keep in the attic. These were photos from the past, showing the previous owner of the house, Enrique, as well as Clara's naive childhood smile. They were proof that time does not stop, and that even the worst storm can turn into a friendly sun. One spring afternoon, Clara and Gabriel, now accompanied by little Aurora, decided to visit the old alley where Gabriel, then Raphael, had spent so many hungry nights. They took with them some of the foundation's employees and a lot of supplies for people who were still defenseless there. They walked through narrow streets, distributing water, food, and transport vouchers to help them find shelter. When they reached the exact place where Clara had first met Gabriel, the wind blew gently, as if in a whisper of memories. He held his daughter in his arms and looked around. They experienced a lot of pain there, but it was there that the miracle of their lives was born. Clara put her arms around Gabriel from behind and said in a low voice, "This is where it all began." He kissed her hair and looked at his daughter. "And may it be so from now on, always towards something better." The sun had set, staining the sky a reddish hue, and the streetlights were lit up in the narrow street. In this scenario, Clara and Gabriel said goodbye to the past, definitively, walking hand in hand towards a future that no longer bound chains or fears to them. Destiny, which once conspired to cross paths in a cruel conspiracy, became an ally that offered them the most powerful weapon, a love that is reborn even from the rubble.